mother ends up being the donor for that child, and it's not of any use. So your point is very well taken that we don't want a carrier liver for this situation, which decides who gets the transplant. But I guess if it's not a cadaveric one, then it's different. Yeah.
Just that, I mean, just talking of carrier and transplant in Wilson's,
Yeah.
we've had parents, again autosomal recessive,
Yeah.
donating, and they've done pretty well. They've
Yeah.
done pretty well with the transplants.
Yeah. So in the ideal setting, where you're going through the whole process, you don't want it. But if there's nothing else available, a carrier liver can do the job, but it's not the ideal one to start with. It's really not the ideal one to start with. So I think we've talked a lot about this as we went through these couple of cases. So I'll try and move this along, to say how we as clinicians can really often make a bedside diagnosis with basic laboratory parameters. And really, I think our training in India allows us to do this. In the US, everything is a test, another test, and another test. And very often, the physician has not even entered the patient's room. So I hope we're not heading in that direction here. So I wanted to thank Dr. Nagra Abha, who I've got to know through the years, as well as Dr. Muranjan, who've made my visits to Bombay really a pleasant one. Every time, it's really a pleasure to come back and speak. What Abha asked me to talk about today was the liver glycogen storage diseases and what the approach should be. So I'm going to try and talk through this. We don't have a pointer, right? No, that's fine. That's when you're thinking of glycogen storage disease. And the other part is that the deficiencies affect many, many different tissues. Others, and even individuals with the same disease class can have heterogeneous manifestations. And you saw that in that child with glycogen storage disease type 3. We could have had another child come here who was more myopathic or who had more of a cardiac involvement. So just to tell you is that the textbooks can only give you an idea. It's more your interactions with the patients and thinking through it that you can learn. So think about the concept that when you eat, you're storing energy, and when you're fasting, you're releasing the stored energy, and that energy equals glucose. So once again, what is the fuel system in the body? If you think about the fasting system, after we've eaten a meal, it gets stored primarily as glycogen. And then during a fast, there is utilization of glycogen or protein or fat to release the energy, which is glucose. So if you hear the patient's history very carefully, within the first few hours of a fast, the primary source of utilization or energy comes from glycogen or glycogenolysis. After that has been utilized, in the next few hours of the fast, there's what we call utilization of glucose from amino acids or proteins, that's neoglucogenesis. And after a prolonged fast, it's utilization of fats or of ketones. So if you hear the history well, and just in that first case there was irritability and requiring frequent feeds, immediately tells you that there was a problem with a disorder in glycogen utilization. So keep that in mind, that if it's say after 8 to 10 hours of a fast, you're dealing more with a fatty acid disorder as compared to within the first few hours of a fast, it's more likely to be a glycogen storage disease. And so if you think about the structure of glycogen, these are all the glucose molecules, and what they are it looks like the branch of a tree, and the glucose is all linked to each other by what we call 1,4 linkages. And then these little dots over here are what we call the branch points of the glycogen molecule. And you'll see why this is important and why I bring it up. So this is a close-up view. So if you think about glycogen as just strands of glucose, can you imagine how much space it would require to occupy in the liver? So this is very smart architecture. If you have it as a branch structure, it's compact and it can be well stored within the liver. So these branch points are very critical, and there are many enzyme deficiencies. So when you think about the outer branches over here, this is broken down by an enzyme called phosphorylase, which is type 6 glycogen storage disease. And then the inner branches or the inner components of the branches and the branch point is broken down by type 3 glycogen storage disease or the debranching enzyme. So if you remember this, I think you can think about what the symptoms of the patient will be. So if you think about the number of GSDs, they were numbered chronologically, and for any of you who are taking exams, remember that all of them are disorders of accumulation of glycogen in the cytoplasm, except for type 2 glycogen storage disease or Pompe disease, which is a lysosomal storage disease. So we won't talk about that, and we won't talk about the muscle GSDs. We just focus today on the liver GSDs. And so this is the structure, and you don't need to know the whole pathway. The idea is that you've got glycogen at the center, and the glycogen either gets stored in the cytosol or needs to be broken down for energy. So when it's broken down, what goes on is you're making glucose, then glucose 6-phosphate, and it goes down what's called the glycolytic pathway for utilization and then into the citric acid cycle. But some of this cytosolic glycogen gets stored into the lysosome, and that is when there's a deficiency of it is what we call a lysosomal storage disease or Pompe disease or type 2 glycogen storage disease. So now I'll spend a lot more time on type 1 glycogen storage disease only simply because you'll understand it and you'll understand all the other GSDs. So type 1 glycogen storage disease is really a critical condition. It's a very severe situation because the pathway where there is a block impairs the breakdown of glycogen to make glucose, but I'll show you in another slide, it also impacts the ability of protein to make glucose. So remember we said for the child with type 3, we can give protein to provide glucose. In type 1 glycogen storage disease, I'll show you where the block is. It's a real problem for these children because here, so this is the glycogen, and as it's being broken down to glucose 6-phosphate, ultimately to be converted into glucose, you need the enzyme that's missing in GSD1, which is glucose 6-phosphatase, as the name suggests, glucose 6-phosphate broken down into glucose plus phosphate. So if you have a block here, you have a buildup of glucose 6-phosphate, and whenever you have accumulation of a substrate, it has to be shunted somewhere else, right? So some of it goes back and is stored as glycogen, but some of it moves down the pathway into the TCA cycle and is converted into pyruvate, which gets converted into alanine, but pyruvate also gets converted into lactate. Pyruvate also gets converted into fats. That's why you have the hyperlipidemia in GSD type 1. And some of the glycogen or the glucose 6-phosphate which is building up gets converted into uric acid. So just by understanding this pathway, you pretty much know what the metabolic sequelae of GSD1 is. One is that the child within the first few hours of a fast is going to run a low blood glucose. And second, because of the buildup of the glucose 6-phosphate, on a liver biopsy, you're going to see glycogen, but you're also going to be seeing fat. Remember I told you that there's also all this mobilization to become fat. And what you'll see is an increase in lactic acid, an increase in the uric acid, and an increase in the triglycerides and in the cholesterol. So we've learned a lot without really understanding too much of biochemistry, just by thinking about where the block is. So how does the child really present? So you've got this enlargement of the liver, and you've got an enlargement also of the kidney because the enzyme is expressed both in the liver and in the kidney. And as I said, you're going to see glycogen in both the liver as well as in the kidney. Another way to distinguish this is when a liver biopsy is done. For GSD3, what's stored is primarily glycogen. So the glycogen content is extremely high in GSD3 as compared to GSD1, which just may be minimally increased. And what you see is more the presence of fat vacuoles, and that's another way that it can be sorted out. The other thing is in GSD type 1, you'll never see the presence of periportal fibrosis. You'll never really see the increase in the liver enzymes like you see in GSD type 3. So clinically, you can really sort this out just by taking a good history and few basic labs. So as we said, this is a 5-year-old boy with glycogen storage disease type 1A. You can see the pot belly appearance, and he's extremely short. He's way below the 3rd percentile for his age. And you can imagine if you don't have enough glucose for energy, you're not going to really be able to grow very well. And so this is just showing you the hepatomegaly. And so the treatment for GST type 1 is fairly simple. So if you think about a pathway, it's easy enough to build in the treatment. So one is to prevent the hypoglycemia or the low glucose, and which in turn, once you correct the hypoglycemia, it's automatically going to correct your metabolic derangements, which I said were the increase in uric acid, the increase in the cholesterol, and in the triglycerides. And you also need to provide optimum nutrition for growth. Because remember that where the block was, as I said, it's in the conversion of glucose 6-phosphate to glucose. So they have a fairly restricted diet. If you give them table sugar, if you give them sources of fructose or sucrose, ultimately that gets stuck at the point of glucose 6-phosphate. So the diet has to be eliminating cheese, eliminating lactose because that's in the milk. So they have a pretty much, restricted diet, as a result of which many of them are low in calcium, many of them are very low in their vitamin D. And you have to think about it when you're treating a child with a genetic condition like this. It's not just replacing that missing protein or providing the missing enzyme or the missing sugar. You've got to think of the child as a whole. And so for GST1, really optimum nutrition is very critical in the management of these children. So how do you fix the low blood glucose? One way of doing it is by constantly feeding the child, as we saw with the case that we saw earlier where the child is demanding feeds on an hourly basis. The problem with that is if the child sleeps through the night, or if the mother sleeps through the night and forgets to wake up to feed the child can have a life-threatening low blood glucose and can actually die. So there are other ways which it can be done by. One is by a continuous glucose infusion, which is through a nasogastric tube or a G tube that can be placed. Or the other is by the use of a slow-release form of glucose, which is the uncooked cornstarch. And as I pointed out to you, this was work which was initiated at Duke, and now we are working on newer starch products. What we call is the neo starches or the superior starches, which may have even a longer effect in terms of glucose control and with fewer side effects. So this cornstarch that we're talking about is what's really used in cooking and what is, the Chinese as a thickener. It's a paste. It's not anything very pleasant, but they get used to it and they do have it. So we're working towards improving this for the children and the adults with GST. So the other part, as I said, for GST1, you want to give them carbohydrates, but what you want to give them is a complex carbohydrate. If you give them a simple sugar, it will cause a sudden rise in glucose and then a sudden drop because they can't maintain them.